Morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Kanige. I'm the editor of NJBIZ. Welcome to our discussion on the future of energy. When I walked in here this morning, I immediately got the sense that this was going to be a high energy group. I think the massive urns of coffee over there were my first clue. Until, of course, we figure out how to make other things run on caffeine, New Jersey faces a serious question. Can we expand the state's economy while protecting the natural resources and characteristics that make it an attractive place to live, work, and do business? Now, there's no shortage of ideas. The governor has set forth some fairly ambitious clean energy goals. Just last week, the Board of Public Utilities approved plans for a massive wind farm offshore. So there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to do that. In fact, given that those things are happening, New Jersey is actually at the forefront of what is really an international debate over these issues. And this morning, we're going to try to add to that conversation. Leading our discussion will be Frank Felder. He's the director of the Rutgers Energy Institute, which aims to develop sustainable energy production compatible with economic growth and environmental vitality. Frank is also a research professor at the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy, where his work focuses on electricity markets and related energy policies, including issues of design, reliability, renewable and distributed resources, and climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Frank Felder.
Great, thank you for that kind introduction that I wrote. Appreciate that. No, seriously. Good morning. How's everyone doing? So we have a lot to talk about. I don't think we'll get through it all. We're going to try to hit the highlights, and then through Q&A, and then after the event discussion, hopefully continue to fill in some blanks. So thank you, Andrew, New Jersey Biz, for hosting this panel. It's been the second panel in the last several months, so it's a pleasure to be back. What I'd like to do is, in a second, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then I'll spend just a few minutes setting the stage, and then we'll go through kind of a moderated discussion, and then open it up for Q&A. So with that, I'd like to turn it over, and we'll just start to my immediate left and go down the row.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Gibbs. I am the Deputy Director of the Engineers Labor-Employer Cooperative, or ELEC 825. ELEC is a labor management fund representing over 7,200 operating engineers, as well as the signatory contractors who employ them. So a labor management fund is a separate trust that is set up by a union, brings together both sides, the labor and the management, to advocate for things that grow the construction pie. So if things aren't being built and we don't have a growing economy, then we don't even get to the discussion of union versus non-union. So my job at the Labor Management Fund is to support economic development, investments in infrastructure, and policies and legislation that are at all levels of government, whether that's down at the local planning board level, all the way up to the federal government, making sure that the policies and the environment here in New Jersey is one where things are being built and our economy can grow and my members can go to work. My members work on the important infrastructure projects throughout the state of New Jersey and 5 counties in the Hudson Valley of New York, and we advocate for them. So whether that's leading the fight for the Transportation Trust Fund renewal, advocating for a diverse energy portfolio that grows our capacity and supports business and affordability and reliability while reducing emissions and costs. We also support and advocate for water infrastructure and many other kinds. So just important to keep in mind how important our infrastructure is to the overall economy of New Jersey.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. Brian?
My name is Brian Lipman. I'm the litigation manager for the New Jersey Division of Rate Counsel. We are a government agency that is involved in any rate case in the state of New Jersey where a utility is seeking an increase in rates or a change in their tariff. We also get involved in federal policy issues at FERC and the FCC. And what we do is we represent ratepayers, and we argue against any rate increases or to minimize rate increases, and we try and make sure that whatever rate increase is provided is justified, that the rates remain just and reasonable, which is the term of art that is used in our laws. And we litigate all those cases. So anytime you see the utility seeking a rate increase, we will be there fighting to make sure that that rate increase is minimized, to make sure it is the most appropriate minimal rate increase so that they can continue to provide safe, reliable service.
Great. Thanks, Brian. David?
Hi, David Weinstein. I'm from Archer Law, law firm here in the state of New Jersey. We're about 200 attorneys. I practice in our energy and utility practice group. I do work in the solar, the wind, but with biomass, landfill gas, and nat gas-fired power plants. I've been practicing for about 20 years now. Started off in this space when the infancy of solar really took off in about 1999, 2000, and then through that entire space, and have grown, done several wind projects in New England, and now represent several large solar developers nationally. So I have a very broad practice area in this space, and I will say that overall it is growing and developing at a slower pace than I think it should, but we'll have that discussion today.
Great. Thank you very much, David. So just give me a minute or two to kind of lay out what's been going on since the start of the term of the Murphy administration. I keep wanting to say new Murphy administration, but they've been around for a little bit. I think it's fair to say, I think they would even agree that they have a very ambitious in a good sense, clean energy agenda. In a moment, I'll try to sketch out some of that along with the panelists. So underneath that are many objectives. Obviously, the environmental objectives are an important one, greenhouse gases, but also other emissions, particularly air emissions in low-income and moderate-income neighborhoods. So there's a whole slate of environmental goals that fall under this clean energy umbrella. There's also, as was mentioned, economic development, so how to move forward with new investments, new projects in clean energy space. And there's a long list that we'll be talking about, but do it in a way that's economically viable, that supports and expands New Jersey economy while at the same time trying to be respectful of budgetary and ratepayer costs. So that's a difficult challenge. In May of last year, May 28th of 2018, the legislature passed a large clean energy legislation. It involved multiple pieces. I'll only mention some of them. One was community solar, and the community solar rule was adopted by the Board of Public Utilities. So I'll try to avoid the acronym speak, but the BPU, the Board of Public Utility, is the regulatory agency that administers not just energy rates, but for our context, electric rates and natural gas at the retail level within the state. But it's also tasked with implementing, along with the Department of Environmental Protection and the Economic Development Authority, or is it agency or authority? I always forget. Authority, thank you. The clean energy agenda of the governor. So the community solar rule was implemented or adopted by the BPU, the board, in February of 2019. April, just several months ago, the board also approved zero emission credits. In short, it's a payment, a subsidy to existing nuclear power plants, and we can talk about that. The draft Energy Master Plan was released just several weeks ago, June 10th, 2019. The final version will be at the end of this year if things go according to plan. As probably many of you heard, the board on Friday of last week, June 21st, announced the selection of Ørsted, which is an international offshore wind developer, to develop the first 1,100 megawatts of offshore wind. It's called New Jersey offshore wind, although the wind farms themselves will be in federal water, but they'll be paid for through a process called ORECs, Offshore Wind Renewable Energy Credits, in order to finance those projects, and that we will be talking about. And then there's ongoing discussions in terms of energy efficiency and demand response, storage, electrification of the transportation sector, and many other initiatives. So that's kind of the lay of the land. What I thought I'd do today is start with the Energy Master Plan. So my first question to the panel is, the Energy Master Plan, or the draft Energy Master Plan, which was issued several weeks ago, which of the elements really stuck out to you in terms of their importance and their priority? And then we'll talk about the specific elements as we go.
I can get started. So I agree that the Murphy administration has really ambitious goals, and we all know that we need to move towards a future that is more renewable, but we also have to have reliability and affordability, and it has to be feasible. And so something that is of a concern is the lack of direction on natural gas in the draft EMP. And so it has been rightly called a bridge fuel, meaning that it'll help us get to our future because it can lower costs, reduce emissions, and increase capacity. It's my opinion and that of the operating engineers in our organization that the bridge is not complete yet, and we still need more time to get to that renewable future. And natural gas, we believe, has to be a part of that diverse energy mix. So not having direction on that, I think, will be something that needs to get worked out between now and December, because there is limited capacity in New Jersey. If you read some of the public comments submitted by the industry in the initial round of when they were accepting comments for the EMP, they talk about hitting max capacity in 2020, as early as 2021. So we really need to have more access to natural gas. 75% of New Jersey's homes were heated by natural gas last year, and the rates were more than double to be heated by electricity. So we need to make sure that we're keeping those in our minority and poorer communities in mind, that we don't, price businesses out of the market. We're already a high-cost state. So that role of natural gas is something that I think is the most concerning element of the EMP.
Great.
I think, not surprising, my office, the biggest concern is cost. Not only how much, but who pays. There's a lot of things listed in that plan, and they're all really great ideas. They're very important ideas. They're not cheap ideas. And someone has to pay for every single one of those: energy efficiency, the solar, the offshore wind, all of that gets paid for. And is it going to be paid for by ratepayers? Is it going to be paid for by other developers? Who's going to pay for it, and how much? One of our big issues is we like to see a cost-benefit analysis anytime any project is done. And we want to make sure that the benefit outweighs the cost. That's important. We understand ratepayers are going to pay more for clean energy. That's just a given. Even to offshore wind, I think the residential customer is going to pay $10 a month for that additional wind power. I think that was the number. And so you're going to see higher costs, and our main concern is to make sure that, A, the benefits outweigh those costs. Theoretically, there should be savings, energy efficiency. You spend money on it, but you save energy. The cheapest way to achieve our goals is energy efficiency. Not using energy is much cheaper than using other types of energy. So not using energy is our cheapest way, and making sure there's a cost benefit. And again, who pays? A lot of this, we'll talk probably a little bit about electric vehicles. A lot of this is being foisted currently on the ratepayers, and the question is that the appropriate people to pay for these innovations?
So the Energy Master Plan has a lot of very intriguing ideas in it, and I agree that cost is probably something that weighs in everybody's mind. The question is, as I said, who pays for it, and it's always been a blend. There's developer cost, always has been private developer cost. There's ratepayer support, which is through the various programs we have now, SRECs, ORECs, through your general payment within your actual tariff that you pay out every month. And that blend just needs to be paid attention to, because it's a burden that we all have. We all share. It's a common goal. That's why it's a state master plan. It's not any individual's master plan. So the belief behind the master plan as it's currently structured is that we all will benefit from the energy master plan. My biggest concern with any energy master plan of a state is that it's in isolation, and it's not always in concert with what's going on around in other states. So while we may have very lofty goals in what we want to do because it's good for us, unless we get some of the other states around us to also follow suit and where we're headed, the goals of some of the environmental side of this, the actual environmental protection side of these types of programs, don't really get the benefit you're trying to achieve, because states around you are not doing the same thing. They're not in the same way. And our federal government right now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at things, is not in lockstep with how we're looking at how we want to go as a state. So it makes it difficult, because you have federal subsidies, which we're not going to get really into, that are dropping away, that help these industries to continue to provide the cost benefit to the public. And at the same time, you still have continued heavy support in fossil fuels. So, you have a very, I'll say, you have a dichotomy and different ideals about what's important, because I'll be very clear. Utilization of natural gas has kept your rates low over the past 10 years. If we did not use nat gas the way we use nat gas right now, your rates would probably be double what they are right now. So natural gas has to be part of the solution. It is part of the problem, but it's better than what we had before, which was a lot of coal-fired plants going off to our west, which, again, now we have at the federal level some deregulation in coal, which is going to make it interesting, again, to see where things go. But these are the things we need to be thinking about when we go through this. Yes, we need to worry about what we're going to do as a state, but we also need to pay attention to what's going on at the national level as well.
Can I just quickly add
Please.
to, I think it's a really important concern that you bring up, especially because we compete in the PJM regional market. And so if our energy is too expensive for the grid, we will lose out to other cheaper, dirtier markets. That's not good for the environment, and it's certainly not good for the economics of New Jersey to be, and its term is leakage, but we're leaking money and we're getting the leakage of the bad, dirtier energy. So I totally agree that natural gas continues to be an important part of the equation to make sure that we aren't completely priced out. So it just has to be done in a balance.
Just for the broader audience who doesn't spend their life on a daily basis thinking about energy policy, PJM's the wholesale electricity market, originally stood for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, but now it counts for about 14 states, kind of in the mid-Atlantic region. The way electricity works, just the underlying physics of electricity, we generate and transmit electricity over large-scale regions, which is economical. Since PJM includes multiple states, some states have joined RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Think of it as a policy to cap greenhouse gas emissions from the production of electricity. Others, like our immediate neighbor, Pennsylvania, has not. And just given the way the electricity flows on the transmission grid, power that's generated from coal plants from Pennsylvania seamlessly would flow into New Jersey along with the emissions. So that's where the term leakage came from. So that's one area of misalignment in terms of where different states and the federal policy, so David talked about this in terms of, and what New Jersey does has to be integrated or at least considered in that broader context. On the other hand, a lot of Northeast states are pursuing offshore wind, and for example, New York. So let me turn the question back to the panel and ask about both New Jersey's offshore wind policies and its integration with the rest of the region. Maybe that's a counterpoint. David, did you want to?
So, offshore wind. So the first major offshore wind project in the United States was just completed within the past couple of years off Block Island. It was a 30 megawatt, 5 or 6 turbine facility. And the cost of it is about $300 million, just to give you an idea. Now, costs are coming down in this area, but that was delivered at 24 cents a kilowatt hour to the residents of Block Island. Now, that sounds like a ton of money. If you think about it, if you just go look at your bill tomorrow or tonight when you get home, you'll see that's a lot of money. But to the residents of Block Island, they were actually saving money because their rates were some of the highest rates in the entire country. I think they were paying close to 50 cents a kilowatt hour before. So they had a huge savings from this.
And the reason is they're an island, so they had to import diesel oil to make electricity, which is expensive. So think of them kind of like Hawaii, but not the great.
It's good water. So, but that said, it shows that rates do matter because that program helped those individuals, and it was the first major program. It was part of a much bigger program, by the way. There's I think, was it 5 gigawatts that they're trying to build off of between Block Island and up into Martha's Vineyard. So, I mean, it's part of a much bigger project that was being proposed that not all of it took off yet. But when you look at what was just put out this past week, the award for the OREX in New Jersey to Ørsted, you can see the benefit. If you look across the Atlantic Ocean and look at what's going on in Europe and how wind power really does drive a lot of how they work, it matters and it helps. It helps bring the costs down because the cost of construction comes down the more you build. The development R&D goes into the areas because there's more people going in and actually utilizing the actual technology. So there's more money invested in the area to help bring those costs down. That's what's happened with solar over the past 10 years is because people are utilizing it, it's come down. So those costs will continue to come down. At the same time, when you look at it, the way we do, and I'm not going to get too much into energy policy here, but the way we do subsidies in the United States is very different than how they do the tariff systems in Europe. So you really have to look at the whole picture. And that's what I'm going to keep harping on, is that every idea is a good idea if it helps reduce the emissions and ultimately will help ratepayers pay less, or at least have a desire to offset their utilization more. But if you don't look at the picture and how we deliver and how it's created and how it's generated and how it's fed into the system and how the system can actually handle the energy that's being developed, that's going to be problematic. My concern mostly with wind is not whether or not it's going to get developed. It's going to happen, folks. You're going to get offshore wind. I don't know if it's going to happen in the next 5 years, next 10 years, but it's going to happen. But my concern with it is, are we going to have a sustainable grid behind it to actually take that additional energy into the grid system behind it, together with the other increased demands that we have, without some type of offset of utilization? And that's really my bigger concern with it.
Brian, your office was involved in evaluating part of the offshore wind proposals. What was your office's and your reaction and thoughts on that?
Well, our office was involved in making sure that the impact on ratepayers, which was one of the many, there are 6 factors that had to be considered by the board. One of them was impact on ratepayers, and we were asked to help evaluate the impact on ratepayers, and we kind of helped rank I believe it was 14 different proposals to determine which ones had cost benefits and which ones didn't. And the good news is that the one that was awarded was one of the ones that we felt would be appropriate. One thing I want to touch on that I think troubles me about offshore wind is the transmission. And there's 2 things that concern me. One is that if you look at the way the board drafted the order, there's an out for Ørsted with regard to transmission. They put in their best guess on how much it's going to cost, and transmission, just so you're clear, that they generate the wind offshore. They got to bring it onshore. Those wires, cables, bringing it to shore. That's transmission. And that transmission is going to be costly. The interconnection, where it connects onto the grid on land, is going to be costly. And because I know we're limited in time, we're kind of hitting highlights. One of my other concerns is...
Before you do, I want to clarify. So the BP released on Friday in the press release that the OREC, the financing mechanism, the offshore renewable energy credit, was $98.10 per megawatt hour. You're saying that does not include the transmission from the turbine at sea, 15 miles out, to land?
That includes an estimate for the transmission.
I see.
However, if it costs more than the estimate, and I can pull up the order if we really want to get
No,
into
not right now.
details,
I just wanted to make sure I understood it properly.
I feel like they capped it at $174 million. Anything over $174 million, is that the right number?
Sounds right, yeah.
Somewhere around there. Anything over that, ratepayers are going to pay that. The OREC will go up.
I see.
So if their estimate is wrong, if it costs more, now, as you know, they partnered with PSE&G. That should help with the onshore transmission because it gives them someone to plug into. Interconnections can be extremely tricky within New Jersey, especially in the PS territory. And so hopefully with having, although I think they're coming in the JCP&L territory, or ACE.
Yeah. Do you remember there was a proposal, it's going back about 5 or 6 years ago during the Christie administration of
The fishermen's?
the fishermen's line? Do you remember what the cost estimates were for that? I mean, I remember it being very, very high.
It was high, but don't forget, that was right offshore. These are much further out, so it's longer miles.
Right.
It's more a lot more power. That was, I think, a 5 megawatt or
It might have been, yeah.
12 megawatts. We're talking about 1,100 megawatts. You're talking large cables. Now, the other thing I want to
please
get
go ahead.
into is that you mentioned New York is also developing offshore wind. One of the, I'll call it cute things about New York's offshore wind is it's actually off the coast of New Jersey.
But it's in federal water.
It's in federal water, but it's off our coast. So they're going to build a transmission line, and there's a lot of talk about building a transmission line that would go from Virginia all the way up to New York. My concern is that we will end up paying for offshore wind that will then get plugged into New York. This is becoming a serious problem here in New Jersey. A lot of our generation is being sent over to New York. Prices are even higher in New York than they are here. And if you're selling capacity or selling energy, you want to sell for the highest price you can get. That's your job. And if you can get it to New York, you're going to get a better price than you're going to get in New Jersey. If the interconnection lines ultimately lead all the way to New York, my fear is that a lot of this offshore wind megawatts are going to end up in the New York grid and not in the PJM grid. And one final thing, once you put an electron into the grid in New Jersey. I can't tell you which electrons are lighting that light up there. We're part of PJM. That electron could be coming from Indiana. It could be coming from all the way far south from North Carolina. I don't know where it's coming from. It's all interconnected. The PJM grid that you mentioned, it is the largest in the world. It goes out to Chicago, and it goes down to North Carolina and pieces of Tennessee, and it is immense. And it's something to consider when you're plugging power into a grid.
Go ahead, Kate.
Sure. From the offshore wind perspective, I have two things that I'd like to touch on. One being workforce development and how important the whole supply chain and the labor force to build this brand new technology. It's innovation, and we're trying to figure out the engineering and the research and development and the technological advances. We want to make sure that our operating engineers are ready to go day one. We have two state-of-the-art training facilities, one on the Turnpike at Exit 8A and one in New York, and we invest millions annually, not only in apprenticeship training, but in retraining and continued education for our members. And that's to make sure that they are up to date on the most cutting-edge technology. And we've even started partnering with some institutions of higher education to get more involved with the GPS technology, the sonar, and as cranes and all of this construction equipment gets more and more reliant on computers and automated technology, our operating engineers need to be the ones who can troubleshoot it, fix it. They become more IT than construction. So the market is changing, and we're making sure that we're making the investments in their education and training now so that we aren't lagging behind. So that's an important piece of this. And the other is that with the New York and New Jersey and what's going on nationally, New Jersey, because of its location, has a real opportunity to become a regional and national leader in terms of having ports and access. And we could become a real, we talk about the innovation economy. New Jersey really, because of its geographic location, we really could become the hub of offshore wind for the East Coast. So I think that investing in our ports is going to be something that the state needs to look into with some sort of public-private partnership so that we can take advantage of those, because whether it's in South Jersey or up in the central, more Elizabeth, Perth Amboy area, the Amboy areas, there's a lot of opportunity there.
So in the press release, the Board of Public Utilities announced there would be 15,000 jobs. What they mean is job years. So it'd be 1,000 jobs for 15 years or 15,000 jobs for 1 year. So it's job years. And you mentioned the supply chain and New Jersey's goal, along with pretty much every other state between North Carolina and Maine, to be the offshore wind leader. What are other things besides the job training, the economic development, on the economic development side that New Jersey businesses should be considering?
So one of the things that, and it's interesting because really you don't think about it right up front when you think offshore wind, how much the port development really is going to be a huge part of this. Because if you think about, you can't really build, you're vertically constructing this 150, 200 foot, 300 foot, maybe not how tall they actually end up being offshore, tower with a turbine on it out there. But all that staging happens on land. And all that staging happens in your ports. And your ports aren't always where you think they are. Some of the largest ports that are proposed, at least in the southern part, are actually up the Delaware Bay. So they're not sitting out on the ocean front. They're actually in our bays, and it's going to happen throughout the entire state. Offshore wind is going to really help a lot of these port towns develop and become vibrant again. It's going to create the jobs onshore for a lot of very technical work. It's going to create a lot of opportunity for advancement or research and development, because you typically want your research and development areas to be relatively close to the implementation places that it's going to happen. It just makes it easier. So there's going to be a lot of development in these areas, and that development is going to create a lot of tangential development around it. And that's really what's exciting to me about offshore wind. One, yeah, it's going to help with our actual rates, but two, you have this technology. We really do have the ability, because of the amount of ports. I mean, New Jersey, if you don't realize how many ports we have, go just take a look at the list. We have a lot of ports, a lot of open access, a lot of deep water ports to New Jersey that really would be helpful both to New York, but also to New Jersey and further south. So, I mean, we are really uniquely located and central to a lot of the development that's going to happen up and down the East Coast. So even if we don't get our offshore wind before somebody else does, it's still going to help our port system.
Right. And to be clear, I was talking about the energy, the job issues.
Right.
I mean,
right.
The fact that we issued a proposal for 11 or a bid for 1,100 megawatts puts us way ahead of every other state. If you read the order, part of what Ørsted promised was to help develop a wind institute, wind jobs. I mean, the goal here is not just to develop 1,100 megawatts and then ultimately 3,500 megawatts of wind off the coast of New Jersey from New Jersey. Our hope is that we can also have wind developed in New York, in Delaware, in Maryland, all coming out of New Jersey. You know, the hope is that New Jersey will be the hub, and we're centrally located. You can go from New Jersey to Virginia up to Maine on the coast. We're almost dead center, and we're in a really good location. And those jobs obviously are very important, and that was one of the driving forces that the board looked at when they granted the Ørsted bid.
And New Jersey's been down this road ever since I've been here for the last, 15, 16 years, with solar back in 2004 and offshore wind. And it's in the news today on other issues, linking jobs. Do the jobs actually materialize? What type of jobs? What are the wages? Are those jobs in state? And what's the policy behind making sure those jobs actually do come that are committed to or by the developers? So we've talked a little bit about offshore wind and its impact. Another major issue is energy efficiency and demand response. So energy efficiency is using electricity and natural gas more efficiently, and demand response is reducing the usage during peak hours, particularly for electricity when it's more expensive to produce and to deliver. So currently, the board and the Office of Clean Energy is thinking through energy efficiency measures. The Clean Energy Act that I mentioned that got passed in May of 2018 set mandates for the first time in New Jersey's history, I understand, for the electric utilities to reduce the consumption by us, demand for electricity 2% per year, and for the natural gas 0.75% per year. And there's a process over the summer to figure out how energy efficiency programs, which in New Jersey are done by the utilities and by the Office of Clean Energy through a contractor, how to get this policy aligned to achieve those goals. So let me open it up to the panel on what's your view and vision for how New Jersey can cost effectively achieve the mandates as outlined in the Clean Energy Act.
So I'm going to just go back to affordability in that, we advocate for investments in infrastructure because for every dollar you invest in infrastructure, you get more than $2, almost $3 back. So we know that it's a good investment in terms of local economic benefits. And energy efficiency is certainly a key component of that. But when you look at the BPU and how many, at one point I looked and there was $12 billion worth of rate cases before the BPU, not counting offshore wind. And that was maybe a month or two ago, so who knows what it's up to now. And so, all of these projects and all of these innovative ideas, they're all great and they all sound really wonderful. And, nobody wants to be against any of these things, but we have to be practical. We're the most expensive state in the country to do business in. And so we have to have that look at the whole board approach where, yes, we're moving towards innovation and technology and moving towards that renewable future, but we still need natural gas to help us mitigate those costs and make it feasible, even when you're talking about energy efficiency investments, because we know that there's so much right now pending, and ratepayers can only bear so much, businesses can only bear so much, so we have to be really cognizant of that, and I think, again, natural gas just helps play a role in that so that we can continue to invest in solar and OREX and other forms of technologies that we can't even think of now. I think we still need natural gas to make that happen.
So there's two things. One, I do want to respond a little bit to, we often hear in my office the every dollar invested yields $2 to $3 elsewhere in the economy. But what never is done, and our office does it on a regular basis when we get these cases, is nobody looks at the cost to really the businesses and the lack of what's going to happen there. So, yes, we invest $1 and rates, there might be some change, but that investment of $1 raises your rates. And there's a breaking point where the rates become too high and businesses start to close. People don't have as much money. They're not having a discretionary income. And that ripple effect needs to be looked at. You know, it would be great. And I put together that chart I think that you were looking at, and it was around $12 billion worth of proposals in front of the BPU. And since I put that chart together, there's been 3 more rate cases filed. So let's call it $12.5 billion worth of proceedings in front of the board. That's all going to go into rates, and that's all going to increase your rates. And so, okay, great, we are going to have more reliable electricity service. We'll have better gas service. But at some point, there's no one to provide the electric and gas to if the rates are too high. So that was the first thing I wanted to point out. The other thing I want to talk about energy efficiency is the real battle that's going on right now at the BPU, at the board, is who is going to do energy efficiency. We've got one major utility in this state that wants to become the sole source of energy efficiency within its territory. And they have a $2.5 billion, with a B, program in front of the board right now to take over all the energy efficiency within its territory. The Office of Clean Energy would not run any of the energy efficiency.
You can say their name. I think we know who it is.
It's PSE&G's, yeah.
To remove all doubt.
So there are essentially 7 major energy utilities in the state, and PS obviously is by far the largest of them. The issue is that if you have PSE&G push Office of Clean Energy, OCE, out of that space, you're relying on the other utilities to do the same thing, and you're not going to get the same service throughout the entire state. That's the first problem. So if you're in PS territory, you might have a program that's not available to you in ACE or JCP&L territory, or in the New Jersey Natural, South Jersey Gas territory. The other thing that you need to keep in mind, while PS runs a very good program, I can't fault the quality of some of their programs, they don't do it for free. You know, they're a business too, and they're looking for a return. And usually right now, the average return in the state of New Jersey for a utility is 9.6%, which I'm sure all of you would love to be able to get on your investments. But that's what a utility gets, and we fought very hard to get it down to 9.6. And that's only on the state level. On the federal level, these companies are getting in the 10s or 11s. So these investments do not come cheaply. So that's another issue we want to keep in mind. And also, what happens is, if you have utilities, they're not always doing the best things that they can do. OCE, Office of Clean Energy, has the ability to look statewide. And
Just to interrupt, the Office of Clean Energy is part of the Board of Public Utilities. Right. It runs its clean energy program.
It's a division within the Board of Public Utilities. And in recent cases, what we found out is that because certain electric companies do not like to run energy efficiency programs in the state, gas companies, natural gas companies, took up the slack and tried to run electric energy efficiency programs. So, think about what your business is, and then try and run someone else's business and do it efficiently at a totally different idea. That's what happened. We had energy efficiency programs that were not meeting cost-benefit analysis, and that is extremely difficult to do. But because it was outside of their scope and they didn't have the expertise, it became more expensive. So I think it's important right now for the Office of Clean Energy to maintain its control over the energy efficiency programs and not to turn it over to the utilities, because I'm concerned it's going to be more costly and you're going to have a hodgepodge of programs across the state. And just depending on which side of the territory, territories change, you change the street, which side of the street you're on, you have access to something that your neighbor does not.
Just a question. Other states run that, though. Other states don't always dictate from the top down. They let
Other states do allow utilities to run, and that was brought up. Other states do allow their utilities, but I think the other states probably keep a tighter rein on their utilities and what they're doing, I hope.
I would hope so. But so it's not that the market can't do this. It's that we don't trust the market to do this.
And New Jersey has tried every combination. Originally, the utilities were running the energy efficient, and they had a coordination mechanism that had its positive and cons. And then it was actually through the RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative Act, that opened the door for the utilities to get into energy efficiency right at the time of the 2009 recession. And that was a way both to mitigate the recession, but also start getting ahead of this stuff. And then we're in our place, the states where we have this combination of programs run by Office of Clean Energy and the utilities.
Yeah, I think in 2003, Office of Clean Energy took what's the SBC societal benefit charge and took it back internally, which had its pros and its cons because they had more control over it, but unfortunately so did the legislature. And that's the fund that you see that's always being rated in the budget. That's money that you're paying in your bill. You'll see a line for SBC.
So I know that's a societal benefits charge. It's a tax. When I say tax, people don't like that, but that's what it is. It's a charge per unit of natural gas or electricity that funds the Office of Clean Energy. That does a variety of things, renewables, energy efficiency, and other things.
And I agree with you. It's a tax, but the courts do not.
I say it in a neutral way.
Right,
It is.
but the courts have found that it is not a tax. So
Okay, well, economically, it's a tax.
I mean, you know the old expression, the government's here to help, So, I think that there's a way to take, again, a balanced approach where you have, private sector industry leading the way in making these technological innovations and doing that because unfortunately in this state, money gets diverted all the time when it's supposed to be, segregated for a specific fund. And so I think that it makes sense. But again, it can't be, there has to be some sort of balance, right? Where you have to have coordination and the state oversight over it, but maybe it isn't, So I think that with a lot of these energy policy issues, people try to make them into these it's a dichotomy. It's this or it's this. It's black or it's white. And really, we need to kind of take a breath and say, we have to take a balanced, feasible approach that everybody, that gets us there and takes forward progress. But New Jersey cannot fight global warming entirely by ourselves. The United States is leading the world in reducing emissions, and New Jersey is one of the leading states. So while we continue to make really ambitious first steps in every single aspect of this, we just have to take a breath and take a more balanced approach.
you raise a really important point, which is competition is really important to drive down prices. And one of the problems with the utilities, the way the utilities are proposing, is they want a monopoly. And if they have a monopoly, what happens is, this is really interesting. If you're a plumber, you no longer can go out to the house and do gas energy efficiency. You have to go to PSE&G, and PSE&G has to dispatch you to do their program. So you're working for PSE&G as a contractor now, and you're not working on your own anymore.
David, do you want to jump in on this, this
I'm
trade-off?
going to take it a little different because
Please.
I think this area we understand, but there's some other areas within this section of the master plan I think that are somewhat interesting, and that's regarding battery technology. I think that was also in this particular area because one disclaimer, I represent several battery companies as well. So, but the technology in the battery area has grown exponentially over the past several years, and you're seeing them start to mate them up a lot more with solar facilities, and that's because the sun's only out during the daylight hours. When the sun goes down, you no longer have production, and you're now drawing back off the grid every night. So solar is pretty simple. Produce when there's sun, don't produce when there's no sun, so the moon's out, no electricity, and then you have to draw off the grid and draw off these other more often dirtier fuels during the night. Hopefully you produce more than you otherwise need during the day, so if you're able to store that someplace, you can then become even closer to a net zero user off the grid. And battery technology is a really important part of that solution. And I think as the battery technology, and it's talked about in the master plan, as it continues to grow and as we continue to support that particular area, it'll make it easier for people to become more independent and grid independent, which is important as well because our current grid is so taxed. We haven't really talked about that much, but there's not a lot of capacity within the grid. Certain providers within the grid, because the way it's structured, these local utilities are responsible for maintaining their section of their wires within the grid, and not all of them are created equal. Not all of them have the same amount of capital available to maintain their grid. So some of our providers are better than others, and that's not just true in New Jersey, that's true nationally. So if you're able to become net independent by using other technologies, it actually will help reduce the utilization of the grid, reduce the overall exposure, and hopefully reduce the overall I'll say, dirtiness of our current fuel stock that's being utilized to create our energy. So it's just it's a really, really interesting part of the master plan.
I agree. Storage is key to implementing clean energy because the wind only blows some of the time, solar only some of the time. Storage is key, and the Clean Energy Act, which is the legislation that Frank had mentioned earlier, has in it this one section at the very beginning, and it's excellent. It talks about how we should study it, how we should make sure we're doing it cost effectively, and it's really good until you get to the last section, which then mandates that we have to have 600 megawatts of storage by 2021. I'm not convinced that's feasible. And then 2,000 megawatts
By 2030.
by 2030. I toured a facility in Chicago, the aquarium. Yeah, I went to the aquarium and toured their electrical plant facilities and didn't see any fish. But that's another story for another time. But
Is that where the cables are being run?
one of the things that they have storage, and they have a lot of storage, but right now storage is still extremely expensive and bulky. They basically had a semi-truck in their parking lot, and when you walk in, it's filled with what to me look like car batteries. I'm sure they're not actually car batteries, but they look
No,
like
they're probably car batteries.
car batteries. And that's how they're doing the storage. Now, the battery technology and other storage technology is, well, I shouldn't use the word exploding, taking off. And it's going to be incredible, and we need it. We desperately need it. I've seen some really interesting and innovative private sector ideas on storage. My favorite one is actually a semi that's a battery that comes here in the summer for solar and then goes out west in the winter for wind, because onshore wind blows more in the winter out in Indiana. So that it's on a truck and they can move it to wherever they need it. It's a great idea, but it's got to come down some more in price to be really cost effective. And I'm concerned 600 megawatts by the end of 2021. I'm not sure we're going to get there.
So-
There's been, NYSEG has put out several proposals that in New York for storage technology that have been responded to very favorably. I'm not saying they're inexpensive, but part of this is an investment strategy as well. I mean, it's not always. Sometimes in order to be able to get the cost down, you have to make the initial investment into the actual technology itself. And if the states are not willing to let the utilities make the investment to be able to get these particular technologies in more broad use, you're stuck with an underlying problem, which is that it's still just a test. It's still not at scale. I see this all the time. Right now, I have somebody who wants to do a gasification unit. Renewable, totally separate area. But I mean, they're trying to create energy from gasifying tires. Gotta love it.
So this raises a couple questions. One is Rutgers recently, colleagues of mine, I wasn't an author of the study, released a storage report for the Office of Clean Energy. So I think that's on the web and available as mandated by the legislation. Storage links to demand response because you can get this peak off peak as well as the reliability and resiliency issues. But the case that you've been making, David, for storage, states need to take the lead to push down costs. You can make that case as you and others have done for offshore wind, and just go down the electric vehicles, go down the list. So it's solar. So how should the state think about its role? And you mentioned, New Jersey is just part of the U.S., part of the world on the climate scale. What role should the state have, and how does it should assess these trade-offs between competing technologies, cost, economic development, and its broader international role?
I think we have to support a diverse portfolio that is focused on competition and innovation and, making the investments. You have to make the investments in order to move us forward. And I want to go back to, something you mentioned about, 9.6 ROI, which anybody who knows about it, when you're investing, man, wouldn't you love to get, that kind of return? But in conversations with some of the industry folks, when you talk to them, it actually kind of, it made sense to me the other day. If you made $1 of profit from selling ice cream, or you made $1 of profit selling dynamite, right? Wouldn't you take the less risky thing and sell ice cream because you could make $1 profit on the ice cream rather than the dynamite? So, we have to make sure that we keep that in mind when we consider ROIs and what, we need to support our private sector market, because this energy future does not happen if the state isn't, and government at all levels isn't working with the private sector. We need their innovation, their expertise, and the competition to move us forward. So the state absolutely has a role, but we have to make sure that we're not villainizing. I think there's been a lot just nationally and in this area of villainizing, the private sector a little bit. And, there are partners in this. And so I think we need to just make sure that we're open and the state is playing a collaborative role with the private sector.
It'd be very interesting if you ever just removed all subsidies. There's theory out there, but if you take a look at it, part of what you're dealing with is that business will go to where it's the least expensive way to produce their particular product and get the most return for their dollar. Whether that comes from government, and often government subsidies are then a policy. It's a way to have business come and do that which you wish them to do by giving them a subsidy. That's what drives the policy side. That is the discussion we're really having here, which is if we believe that this is the way that New Jersey needs to go and lead, then we as a state need to make the investment and let the private sector do what it does with that dollar, hold them accountable to make sure that they make the investments that you're expecting them to do with your tax dollar. And from that, as they continue to become better at what they do, reduce your subsidy. Because your idea here, it's kind of like angel investment. It's the best way to put it. You're putting your money in the area that you want to see it happen and then have it develop and hopefully get a return back which you expected in the first place from that investment. Part of it is there's a inherent lack of trust that business is going to do the right thing, that business will always only do that which the dollar drives them to do. Yes, that's part of capitalism. That's part of what we're founded on is a capitalistic society. That's okay. We as Americans like that idea. Otherwise, we would have never had a lot of the expansion we've already had in this country. But what's happened over the past several years is that, and probably the past several decades, is a concern that business runs amok and doesn't want to actually drive things in a way that is beneficial to a broader audience, but only to themselves in the bottom line.
Right, but
That's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that.
But there's another approach that New Jersey could take as opposed to identifying areas that New Jersey wants to be the lead in. And I'm not sure of the policy motivation for that. I mean, New Jersey should want to be the lead in affordable clean energy, not the lead in number of X installations. But put that aside. Right. New Jersey, through the Energy Master Plan, is a list of technologies. I'm sure many of them quite necessary and worthwhile. But then it decides which ones, through different subsidy mechanisms, offshore O-RECs, go down to Z-RECs, RECs, S-RECs, which we're about to get to, solar storage, the whole list. Another approach, and then subsidies are through the rate-making process or through the legislation to incentivize to produce whatever the technology and amount that someone has decided. Another approach is to just internalize the environmental costs, which is what the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative does, and then let the market figure out, well, if it's more expensive to make electricity from a coal plant versus wind, if it's cheaper to do solar than wind or solar plus storage than wind. So that's a whole nother policy paradigm that the state could adopt, which is the one that I would think pretty much every economist has advocated. But New Jersey's decided not to go down that road. So my question is why? Why is the state, both at the legislative and at the state agencies we've been discussing, down this path of picking individual winners and losers?
Well, there's two things. One, I want to pick up on something you just said, which was when you give a subsidy on one of these technologies, the hope is that eventually they would reduce or eliminate the subsidy. And I think one of the biggest problems we're seeing here in New Jersey, and we're about to get into it, is that once an industry is given a subsidy, they become reliant on the subsidy and they continue to get the subsidy. And we're seeing that, solar prices have gone down, but solar subsidies have not. And that's a big problem. I think really the issue is that it's a lot easier to give a direct subsidy than it is to, for example, do a carbon pricing paradigm. PJM has been talking, the grid operator of PJM has been talking about a carbon, for lack of a better word, a carbon tax for 4 or 5 years now. They've got some really, really smart people at PJM, and they're having a really hard time figuring out how to implement that. And quite frankly, for government, it's much easier to just say, I'm going to give the solar industry $100 million and let them build more solar than it is to figure out how to price carbon and give it to, okay, you produce X amount of carbon, so you're going to have a tax, you're going to have to pay more. What that does is ultimately it does exactly what the subsidies do, except in the inverse way. It makes the coal so much more expensive that ultimately you don't want to produce it anymore, and solar becomes the more opportune way to go. Now, that's worked with coal, and even with the current federal administration doing everything it can to save coal, coal is just too expensive right now, and I don't think they're going to save coal. The nukes, it looks like they're going to be able to provide sufficient subsidies, and again, that's what they're doing. They're producing subsidies to these nuclear power plants so that they will continue to operate.
Let's transition into the solar transition. I'll just quickly tee it up. So as part of the legislation I keep mentioning, back in May of last year, New Jersey is required to, through the Board of Public Utilities, to both develop a transition plan for the solar and a final end state. New Jersey's been working through this issue for at least 10 years, if not longer. So to the panelists, where is the state with respect to the solar transition efforts, and what should it be doing that it's not doing right now?
Well, I mean, I'll get started, and I'm going to respond a little bit differently than your question, but something that I think is a concern and that we all need to be thinking about is that right now, a megawatt of solar takes about 2.8 acres of land. And New Jersey has really densely populated cities and suburbs, and then rural preserved protected lands, right? So when you think about South Jersey needing more energy capacity, where do you put the solar panels? It's mostly covered by the pinelands, which is protected. And as you move into North Jersey, you have more of those densely populated areas, and then you have the highlands. So we just have to be realistic and cognizant at every level of this. Okay, if New Jersey uses 18,000, megawatts a year, and right now we're getting half of that from natural gas, how do we get those megawatts from solar and wind? When you start doing the math and figuring out the acreage you need, it's a lot. So we just have to be mindful of making sure that there's feasibility there. And I think the same thing that happened when, I've been at hearings where the same environmental advocates who oppose fossil fuel projects oppose solar and oppose offshore wind and oppose nuclear. And I asked them one time, I said, I've been at a meeting where you've opposed natural gas. I've been in meetings where you oppose solar and wind and all the. What exactly do you want the state to run on? And there was no answer. And this is a leading environmental advocate in the state of New Jersey at the State House all the time. Had no answer. What are we supposed to run on? And so when we go to cite these solar projects, and even when we cite the wind projects, and especially the transmission, because people think, oh, it's out there, and then it just magically gets to my house. The same transmission projects that people fight now, whether it's because of the scallop beds or it's the fish or the migratory birds, and then it has to come on land, it still has to get generated and go into the grid, and there's still a lot more in terms of distribution and transmission, even if it's solar. So we need to think through that and realize that this is New Jersey. The permitting for these projects is going to be arduous, and these things aren't just going to pop up overnight, and you really do need a lot of land. So just being mindful of that balanced approach, feasible, affordable.
I think one of the things that we need to really think hard about is where do we want our solar? A lot of these subsidies are for rooftop solars on homes, and that's not the most efficient. Grid supply is really where you want your solar. And the other issue is that the way the BPU's current solar rules work, you drive down the turnpike. I don't know how many you took the turnpike. There's all those box warehouses. None of them have a solar panel on top of them because it's not economic the way currently solar is paid out unless you have a large load. So if you have a refrigeration warehouse, it's worth putting solar panels on top. If you don't, then you can't put solar on your rooftops. That is prime real estate. We shouldn't be digging up the pinelands. Great Adventure taking out all their woods to put in solar panels. We have all these rooftops. We have all these parking lots, all these areas in the state that could have solar, that don't have solar because of the way our regulations are currently written. And that's something that the BPU really needs to be looking at right now.
So I think what needs to happen here is you need to look at the cost of development and the necessity for the subsidy itself. And that's not what's really being looked at. If you talk to a solar developer, they'll tell you that what they can develop at. Every one of them will tell you where they can develop. And they'll tell you that what they really need is consistency in knowing what it's going to cost to develop and what am I going to be able to receive in the way of a benefit. The current marketplace for SRECs, I mean, it was horrible at one point in time where you went, this is going back.
So SRECs are the solar version of ORECs. ORECs were offshore wind. SRECs are for solar. Go ahead.
But it's a marketplace. That marketplace is volatile. There's nothing wrong with a volatile marketplace, but if you have the underlying system which has been created that is fairly stable as far as how it looks at the long-term investment dollar going in and how the development cost is being offset, and that's our policy to do so, that's what we need to be looking for in a reasonable development cycle. What happened before was that nobody was really looking at, well, if I give them $600 a rec and they develop, of course they're going to develop, because developers are opportune, like everyone else. They're looking for the most economical way to develop a project and get a return on their investment as quickly as possible. That's capitalism. It's okay. But when you do that, it's at a ratepayer expense, got too expensive, and the market crashed because they breached the overall goal for that particular year and for the next several years, causing a glut in the marketplace. That's what we're trying to avoid happening again, is a glut in the marketplace and create stability. That stability is what really needs to be looked at very closely and carefully, is what is really necessary to develop in the right way.
Well, I will tell you I absolutely will not name the developer, but a developer came to talk to our office during all these SREC transmission periods, and they opened up their books to us. And they showed us that they don't actually need a subsidy to build grid scale solar. He said, I'm taking your subsidy, I'm becoming a very wealthy man, but I could do it without and still make a sufficient profit. But you want to keep giving me money, I'll take your money. And that's something we need to look at. At some point, the subsidy is either significantly limited. Now, if you're doing rooftop, there's still probably a need for some subsidy. But these grid supply projects, these 3 to 5 megawatt solar projects, probably don't need a subsidy anymore.
But the one thing that's happening, again, just taking it back out to the national level, is the national support, the federal tax credit that goes with these is being reduced. So, you got to take a look at the big picture. We always get focused on what we're doing here in New Jersey. As I said before, you got to open it up and look a little broader as those subsidies reduce and continue to dwindle over the next several years. What does that do to development costs?
And the trade war with China is going to have an impact on solar panel costs.
Right.
In a moment, we'll go to a Q&A from the audience, but and we've talked about touched on a lot of issues: wind, solar, energy efficiency, storage, so forth. But I did want to give the panelists, and you'll have a chance at the end. Is there another topic that you just want to get out there, perhaps for audience Q&A, or that we haven't discussed related to energy policy in New Jersey?
No, I think we've had a robust discussion today, and it's good to hear different perspectives. And there's things that we all agree on, which is we need innovation and technological advancements to get to where we want to go. We all want to lower emissions, but we want to do it in a way that's affordable for ratepayers, for businesses. Because if it's not affordable for ratepayers and for businesses, then our economy will crash, and there'll be clean energy, but for no one. So we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for our state and our environment, but it's with that balanced approach. And I think you hear that from all of us, that at least these things are being discussed and considered at high levels.
So innovation is important, plus cost effectiveness.
The cost is what's really driving a lot of this. And the one thing I would say to you is get involved. It helps my office to hear from ratepayers. There are trade organizations that do get involved for the BPU, and it's important for you to be heard, because when the utilities come in and talk about savings and how much things are going to be great, people need to talk about how much rates are going to go up and the impact that has elsewhere in the economy. I think it's important that we take a balanced approach and that we understand that, yes, investment in utility infrastructure is good, but let's make sure we're not doing so much, $12.5 billion worth, that it puts everyone else out of business, and we've got pipes to nowhere, wires to nowhere.
David?
I think one thing people should just understand is we've had a lot of discussion about renewables. And just understand, renewables are only 5% currently of our entire energy marketplace in New Jersey. It sounds like it's taking over because that's the storyline. It's still only 5%. To get to the goal under this plan of net neutral by 2050, it's essentially the way I look at it, that's an expansive amount of development and governmental support that has to happen to get you there. And that's opportunity for every one of you out there. And that's what I want you to understand is there's so much opportunity in this area and in this space because not only is New Jersey committed to trying to find a solution to reducing their fossil fuel emissions, almost every other state has some form, except for maybe a couple coal states, of trying to get their energy, to get their emissions down. So if you're not in this space and you're looking for a space to look into, there's a lot of opportunity and growth in this particular sector.
Great, thank you. So we're now going to turn to Q&A. If you have a question, a mic will magically appear in front of you. If you could just say your name and organization and ask a question. A question is not a statement with a lilt at the end. A question is a question. And then, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Rosalind Petrucci, and our company is JG Petrucci. We're developers in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and other places. And we are very, very diverse, so we do everything. But you had mentioned electric cars, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about electric cars.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is something that I'm really concerned with. Number one, between every electric car plus the infrastructure needed to charge it is like adding a house to the grid. So we need, right now we're using 18,000 megawatts and we have these goals of becoming zero carbon neutral, but that's thinking that capacity stays the same, right? So the more we electrify, we need to generate more of it. So that's one concern. So how do we do the infrastructure and what does that do to the grid? So again, we have to make sure that we enhance the grid before we can do those things. And another issue that I see with it is that right now, electric vehicles are not paying their fair share of maintaining our roads and bridges. And so the mom who takes her kids to soccer practice and to school every day is paying their fare of our roads and bridge maintenance with their gasoline. However, somebody driving a Tesla right now gets an incentive and doesn't have to pay to use our roads and bridges. We need to fix that and make sure that everyone is, because all infrastructure, whether it's water, energy, transportation, telecom, we have to be making sure that we invest in all of them. So I don't want to see one form of innovation take away from something that's so critical and important. So just something to think about.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern for me with electric vehicles is the charging stations, the infrastructure, and who's going to pay for all that infrastructure. Right now, what you have is quite frankly, a small, wealthy subset of the state that can afford to have an electric car. They're getting subsidies, and if you want ratepayers to pay for all this electrification, then there needs to be some benefit to the ratepayers. And right now, what you're talking about is, I forget what the numbers were, but PSE&G was going to spend like a couple $100 million putting in charging stations. And they talked about environmental justice. We're going to put charging stations in front of apartment complexes where Section 8 housing is located. People with Section 8 housing are not buying electric vehicles right now. That market is not available to them. But they would have their rates go up so that they could pay for this charging station outside of their facility that's going to be useless. And so while we're putting in this infrastructure, we really need to be realistic on who's using electric vehicles, how it gets priced out. And the people who use electric vehicles should have to pay for the infrastructure that they use, and that includes the roads. I mean, that is a very important problem. In the Energy Master Plan, they talk about electrification of all our passenger vehicles. That sounds fantastic, except that the Transportation Infrastructure Trust Fund is paid through a gas tax, and every one of those electric cars is not paying a gas tax, and therefore not paying into the infrastructure, and who's going to maintain our roads?
So I think your thoughts are well-founded, but those things can be dealt with. I think the part of this that you have to think about is there's private investment going into this area. Walmart is putting charging stations. Now, granted, some of that's coming from subsidies, some of it's not, but they're doing it. Walmart serves everybody. And yes, while electric cars are expensive, part of this is really fleet vehicles. If you really read through this, yes, they want everybody, but they're starting with fleet vehicles. Fleet vehicles are usually subsidized by the state buying them and putting in their own. If you want people to do and utilize electric vehicles, it makes sense to have state and federal and local governments utilizing the technology they want you to use. They model for you. So I think this area actually is more of a positive and will be helpful because it starts off with fleets and then fleet users. So that means PSE&G will get their vehicles electric. Well, that's good. They should be using electric vehicles if that's what the modeling is. So I don't see this as much of a problem as other people do.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Corey Zucker. I'm with Infinity Energy. We're a large-scale solar developer in the state, and we are actively pursuing lease option agreements for community solar. So when you talk about those big box buildings on the Turnpike, Prologis, Matrix, Heller, et cetera, we are actively and aggressively approaching them as well as other builders, developers throughout the state to rent their roofs to basically develop solar. Here's the biggest challenge that we're coming across now. We've wrapped up about 20 megawatts worth of lease option agreements so far that we're putting in for approval. The grids, and especially down in ACE, are not built to support the amount of energy that we plan on pumping into the grid. So they're pushing back on us saying, well, if you want to develop that, maybe you want to make the investment in upgrading our grid. See that there's a bit of a challenge there. Who owns the responsibility for upgrading the grid to allow us to make New Jersey community solar work?
So I'll start. So that problem has been going on for years. It's not new. Certain territories, I won't pick on ACE, but certain territories within the state, their grid infrastructure is less robust than others, mostly because it's more rural and has less demand on it, and now you're trying to put a higher load into that system. The responsibility, I think, is a shared one, and that's that's part of it. You want to develop within it, and I represent a lot of developers who are in this exact problem, and it comes with a solution of trying to determine whether or not we as a state want to help that investment and help the developer subsidize that particular investment, or if the underlying benefit you're going to receive is going to offset the millions of dollars of upgrades you need to put in so that you can develop your project. I know what the answer is most of the time, which is they get abandoned. These projects are not getting done. Those lease options are being held for a long time, and there's a lot of projects out there under lease option that are not being developed for the exact reason you're saying. I don't know what the right solution is to that because it's a much larger discussion at BPU as far as how you actually get that done, because the ratepayers in those areas, why should it unless there's a demand there for that energy for them and they're going to get the benefit through the community solar, maybe they'll do it. But that discussion's going on up there, and it's not been settled. As far as I can tell, that area has not been settled at all.
And there's legislation right now pending on microgrids and,
Right.
and utilizing public-private partnerships. And I think that, as you said, it's kind of whose job is it? It's all of ours. I think that it's going to have to be some sort of collaboration where you have private investors with state investors, with a piece of it being raped. We're all going to have to chip in because the bottom line is that the grid is not in its current state able to do what we want to do in terms of our renewable future. And so we can't just ignore PJM. We have to work with them. But they have 14 states. So, they're a company as well. So, I mean, I think we all have to kind of take our share and work together on this. And it's going to be a complicated road ahead. But as you said, I mean, I think that these are, the projects that have been sitting long are not, and have been abandoned. I think there's an appetite right now to move them forward. And so because there's that societal appetite, I think it will get done. We just have to kind of bring everyone to the table and be willing to collaborate.
And this is not a new problem. This has been a problem for quite some time. I mean, before I was at Rate Counsel, I was with the AG's office representing the BPU, and interconnection problems in certain territories have been a problem at least for the last 15, 20 years. Certain systems are not as robust. This is not so much a PJM problem. Part of the problem is that some of these companies, quite frankly, did not invest over time the way they should have, and their systems aren't where they should be right now. The problem is you get to, okay, well, let's get the system where it should be. Who pays for that? Now, if you, the developer, aren't paying for it, that means we, the ratepayers, are paying for it, because I can guarantee you ACE is not going to do it out of the kindness of their heart. So it's an interesting issue because it's one, quite frankly, part of the reason rates continue to go up recently is that some of these companies are making the investments that they should have made 10, 15 years ago, and they're playing catch up.
And that's why we want to make sure that we continue to not disincentivize utilities from doing the right thing and making proactive maintenance along the way. PSE&G is obviously they've been before the BPU on a lot of really big ticket items lately, and they've been in the news a lot. But, I've been a PSE&G customer, and, so in my rate are built in these investments, and I have a 3-story house now, and 5 years ago I lived in an apartment, and my energy bill for my little tiny 1-floor, 1-bedroom apartment is half in my house now than it was in my apartment. So, it just, in terms of what they've been able to provide and continuing to make investments, we have to keep that in mind that, yes, there's a rate impact, but they've also done things to make sure that we're reducing costs at the same time. So even though I get the benefit of a really reliable system, it's not overburdensome. I'm paying less today than I was, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, and to be honest, a lot of that has very little to do with PSE&G and a lot to do with the price of wholesale electricity. And their favorite word is headroom. And a certain town came to me and they showed me their bill, and it looks fantastic. In the last 15 years, their municipal electric bill has not gone down. It has stayed the same. Then they showed me a breakout, commodity versus the actual distribution services, and the commodity has dipped. It's literally a V. The commodity has dropped, third-party supplier shopping, electricity right now, and this has a lot to do with natural gas, quite frankly. Yeah. Electricity is really cheap. As the price of electricity has gone down, PSE&G has used that headroom in order to make investments. So while the utility rates have not gone up recently, this is something, it goes back to the natural gas. If we stop using natural gas, or natural gas somehow becomes less available, and we have a spike in electricity, you're going to see prices spike tremendously. You saw it during the polar vortex of 2014 with people who had third-party suppliers and variable prices. All of a sudden, their prices went through the roof.
So the only thing I want to add to what you're talking about down in, I'll call it ACE territory, is the counties in those areas are also very interested. So I don't know if you spoke with any of the county leaders, but they are very interested in trying to find ways to get the development to happen, because they want to see the development in their counties. So it is worth having those discussions as well, because the more people you have aligned to try to get something done, the more likely it's going to happen.
Please don't. I hate to point out just ACE. ACE is always the easy one to go.
I can go up to Sussex County if you want. It's the same thing.
JCP&L is not in a much better position.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And there are certain communities. I know we were just contracted to do a 10 megawatt brownfield in Woodbine.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's specifically for Woodbine residents. Right. Okay. But community solar, if I can build something on a rooftop in Edison and help the energy grid for consumers in New Brunswick or Newark or Elizabeth, it's a beautiful program. Just there is that disconnect at grid level that allows us to make the program as robust as it could.
Great.
Correct.
Thank you. Next question from the audience. Yes.
Hi, yes, Stephen Wren from American Properties. You mentioned wind, you mentioned natural gas, solar. Nobody's talked about hydrogen. Is there a fit for hydrogen in the plan? Should it fit in the plan?
So just for educational, hydrogen is like electricity. It's a fuel carrier. You got to make the hydrogen. So you're now back to making electricity, or you can reform it from natural gas. So, but with that,
But there are other technologies, and when you look into the EMP, the ones you hear about mostly are solar and wind, but there are other technologies available, and I frankly don't know as much about them because they're not as far along here in New Jersey. But there's technology available now that can retrofit natural gas power plants pretty easily and make them zero emission. They're doing it in other states. So, and I don't know much about this technology, but there's hydropower. There's so many different things. I think that New Jersey needs to take a a careful, deliberative walk before we run kind of approach, because we've got a lot of pots in the fire. 12.5 billion at Rate Counsel, OREX, SREX. We're trying to redo, adopt a master plan, completely redo solar, launch a wind, not just a little OREC. We're trying to launch an entire industry with a supply chain and work. So while yes, I think we support every and all energy, I think New Jersey needs to kind of deal with what's on its plate right now.
I would mention in the energy master plan, so I'm glad you brought this up, there's a talk about a green bank and financing and the importance of innovation, which is critical for long-term success.
What's interesting about that question is that I think just yesterday my director came up to me and said, what the heck is fusion and what is going on with it? Because for some reason, all of a sudden, there's a lot of talk about fusion in Trenton. I don't know anything about it, but I know that it's yet another, and I think it has something to do with hydrogen, if I'm not mistaken. But fusion energy is something that people are all of a sudden talking about.
Yeah, I can help you out on fusion. I was a former nuclear engineer. So fusion, the quip on fusion is it's 40 years away, and it's been 40 years away for the last 40 years. So I'm all for the New Jersey legislature thinking outside of the box. But it's not going to be here by 2050. Partly, I suspect, because one of the assemblymen is Princeton physicist who worked on their, and still does, I believe, at Princeton's fusion research lab. But that's so fusion is you just it's like the hydrogen bomb. You fuse the lower weight particles, releases energy. Whereas fission, where you split the current nuclear power plant, you split the atoms, uranium-235, and that creates the energy. So that's all back to equals MC squared. But any other group, very good. Exactly. So.
I don't really have much. It's part of it, but it's not there. It's just not a listed. If you take a look at what's listed, as far as what's considered to be renewable energy, it's just not listed. It could be, but it's not listed. It's not biomass. It's just not there. It's not that it couldn't be part of the program.
What, fusion?
Hydrogen.
Oh, hydrogen. That's right, right. But you still got to make the hydrogen somehow. It's just like the electricity. So, right behind you.
Just want to make a couple of points. First of all, I think the panel's done an excellent job.
Introduce yourselves and
yes, my name is Jason Fox.
Your question.
I'm a independent retail energy supplier in the state of New Jersey. We operate in 6 states. But I think what the panel was looking at, and I've listened to you very carefully, is you're looking at residential and commercial, and you're looking at the total impact on the state. And I've been a resident of the state for my whole life. Nobody talks about the 7% energy use tax. They say in New Jersey, right, that there's no sales tax on energy, but the state is collecting 7% on every kilowatt hour on every therm of gas. That's a massive amount of money. I don't even know where that money goes to. It boggles my mind. When you take a look at solar, it's a cloudy day out today. I don't think you guys, the panels, are producing much energy. So we do have to rely upon the grid. We talked about battery technology.
Try to get to a question.
Well, we talked about battery technology. We talked about energy shaving. There's a lot of things in the mix that we can do. You talked about line congestion. You talked about capacity loss, for the wind. We talked about natural gas. We talked about pipelines. How many pipelines are there in New Jersey that actually bring gas into New Jersey? TETCO, Transco, 2, right?
Right. I'm just
so, guys, what I want to just say, we'll wrap it up. What we want to say is that we have to take a look at the actual economic impact. I have a lot of customers that are leaving New Jersey and going to Texas because it's a cheaper state to operate in. People are leaving this state. Residential people are leaving the state because of the overall cost.
All right, let's go to the next question, please. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Jason Steinberg. We're with a company called Scanifly. We are a design-based software for the solar industry that uses drones. My question for the panel is around innovation, going back on the topic you just brought up. Other states in the area, like New York with NYSERDA and Massachusetts with Mass CEC, have a lot of programs, incubators, grants, almost a decade's-long worth of infrastructure around building startups and having homegrown jobs in their states and incubating new technologies. I'd love to hear from each of your perspectives on the panel how New Jersey can do it or is doing it or should do it.
Down in Cape May and in Atlantic County, there are a lot of these innovation hubs, especially around drones and aviation. And, the state has made an effort to support innovation hubs. I know they have the hub, which is the new, center that they're working on in New Brunswick.
Right, it's like a hole in the ground right now, but yep.
Yeah, but I mean,
Right by the
there's
train
so
station.
I think there is a
And it's mentioned in the EMP, the innovation.
exactly,
piece.
and there's so I think that it's something that everybody realizes, and I think the most important thing, like with all these issues, is that we're making sure that we're involving levels of government from local to federal. So don't just engage. I think people sometimes only engage with, well, it's just the governor, right? Well, there's 40 senators and 80 assembly people, and then you have county freeholder boards. All of these groups have economic development authorities, and so they have abilities to invest in these types of innovation hubs. And I think that there's kind of consensus in the community that these innovation hubs are needed and part of the strategic plan of making this offshore innovation industry birth here in New Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, it was in the Energy Master Plan. I think New Jersey is well aware of the need for a hub. In the past, it's been through grants, and there was a division of science for a while, then it went back to the BPU. But there have been innovative grants given mostly by the Office of Clean Energy. I know there was one for development of better solar panels here in New Jersey, and they were working on innovation on, apparently, if you have a thinner film, you get more of the power out of the panel. And so that was one of the research projects that BPU helped fund here in New Jersey. So I know that the BPU has given grants. I think the idea of a hub for New Jersey, probably copying from other states, is probably a better idea. It's been a hole in the ground for quite a while now. I'm hoping that eventually they'll actually be starting to build it up. But the idea is interesting, and I think putting it in New Brunswick, right by Rutgers, right next to the train station, I think it's got the opportunity to really do a lot of good. It's right on the Northeast Corridor, and it's a good central location.
So I'm all for more investment in innovation and in smaller technology startup companies that are able to think and be more nimble. I think you could rethink how you deliver that capital. I think grants are great, but grants don't always work. I think thinking a little bit more outside the box, making that as an equity investment may be something that could really benefit, gives a better return to the state, risk-reward benefit for actually being invested in the company. Different ideas for making this a better solution for companies, I think, is really what we need to have. Because the company's driven, and you want the state to be driven along with them, and that investment to be driven along with them and not static. That's just my thought.
And if you have a revenue stream, you can do a public-private partnership.
Correct.
So these types of, where you are making, they're partners with you
Right.
in innovating, rather than just, here's the money, go do it. It gives you, everybody has some, I think that's kind of the main theme from today is, this kind of balanced, collaborative approach. You don't have to choose between black and white. There is a whole huge scale of gray, and this is going to take time.
Yeah, and letting the market do it rather than the grants is actually, I think, a lot better. The reason I'm aware of the grants is because as a DAG, I had to investigate several of the grantee recipients, and not all of them were using the money for what they should have used it for. And you have to have sufficient oversight. Whereas if there's a market driven, if they're going to lose their shirt if they don't do what they said they were going to do, then they're more driven to make sure they do what they're supposed to.
Great. We have time for 2 more questions.
My name is David Hutter. I'm a reporter at NJBIZ. Thank you all for being here. So we only have one planet with limited resources, and I'm just trying to take a very long-term look. So what do you foresee the worst-case scenario if we are not wise in using our energy, including solar and wind?
Could you I missed the premise of the question. We only have
one planet that has limited
planet.
resources.
Right.
So we, right, I hope to have children and to continue, my family, and I think everyone cares about their children and their grandchildren. Obviously, it's in all of our best interests to make sure that we move forward and have a global, sustainable, energy. In the planet, we have to have sustainable energy, right? But New Jersey cannot do this alone. And so I think that we need to, while it's great to be a leader and to be ambitious and to be aspirational, we also have to be realistic. And, we are a leader and we need to continue leading, but we need to make sure that we're not disadvantaging ourselves at the expense of we're already ahead. I don't think we need to sprint too much far ahead of everybody else. We just have to do it in that collaborative, balanced approach, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, first off, we in New Jersey are in a unique perspective. Having lived through Sandy, we know what happens when the grid fails for 2 weeks. We understand what massive flooding looks like. I mean, we're seeing the effects of global warming here. The reason we're at the forefront, quite frankly, is because we have to be at the forefront, because we're also at the forefront of the damage. All that being said, we need to, take care of ourselves. It is important to remember that if we make our electricity too expensive, then industries are going to move out. One of the steel plants down in, I think it was in Perth Amboy or South Amboy, they're gone. They left. And the reason they left is electricity is too expensive in New Jersey. So we need to focus on that issue, and it's very important to take care of these issues. We've seen the real damage that's coming to our state, but we also have to protect our state economically. And if everybody leaves, we'll have a really cool grid that does nothing.
David?
So whether you believe in climate change or not, obviously our governor does, and many people in the room do. There's definitely something going on, and there's definitely change occurring around us. The cause of it, people point to human interference. Assuming that is true, which we have every reason to believe it is, we owe it to future generations to try to do that which we can to try to make the planet sustainable as long as possible for human life. I think there'll be something here. Whether or not it's human life, we'll find out someday. But that said, the reality is that we want to make sure that we leave a better future for the next generation. That's been always what people thought. I want the next generation to have more than a better chance than what I had today. If we want to continue to provide a better future for the next generation, we owe it to ourselves to make the investments today so that they have the ability to make that same or better investment tomorrow. And that's really how I look at this. We're making the investments today so that they have the opportunity to make their investments tomorrow.
Great. One more question. Yes, in the back. Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning. My name is Carlton Coons with the Department of Labor, New Jersey Department of Labor Workforce Development. Ms. Gibbs, you mentioned earlier a bit of your workforce development training aspect. You talked about apprenticeships, you talked about reskilling, engineers, things of that nature. I'm just wondering, is there any idea from the employers about what type of maybe industry value credentials that they may be seeking, about maybe how long the apprenticeship program will, take to come to fruition and things like that? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so I've actually reached out to DOL, EDA, the Global Wind Organization. What's pretty interesting is that, so the Global Wind Organization, they're headquartered in Copenhagen. They have kind of they're it in the whole world. They have the credentialing mechanism, and so I've actually been trying to get a hold of them. And so if you get a hold of them, you should let me know, because we want to talk to them about making sure, we have 2 state-of-the-art facilities, one in New Jersey and one in New York, where we have the ability to work with the Global Wind Organization or with the state of New Jersey or with the state of New York to make sure that whatever specific credentials that are specific to the wind industry, that we can supply that qualified workforce, because we've been doing it. This work, laying a pipe under water, we've been doing that. We know how to run transmission. We know how to dig piles. Piles are a little bit different out in the water, but not much. So in terms of the training itself, the skilled craftsmen and women who will work on these projects, if they're a skilled welder, they can weld out there. If they're an operating engineer, like my guys on the big cranes, they know how to drive these piles. It's really more about the credentialing aspect, and because it's been based in Europe and it's international, I have been going to offshore business network, and I've been trying to connect with the right people, and I just haven't been able to do it. But I think I'm really glad to hear, that labor is here, DOL is here today, because we all need to make sure that not just from the construction side, but there's from every single piece of the supply chain, from the little component, teeny piece on a turbine, to the transmission, to the substation, to the boats that take the crews out to water, to you would not, the amount of pieces to this it's so insanely complicated, and we are trying to do this quickly. So I think we're all going to need a partner in this.
I think the Wind Institute that has been talked about, that sounds fascinating to me. And I will say that while all that is very important, I've heard from the utilities, they need linemen. They need utility guys who can go up on the pole and fix a wire. That is a skill set that is missing in New Jersey right now, and those are other jobs that are available out there that I know ACE in particular, in their last rate case, we worked with them to have a development program for linemen.
Excellent. So now I'm going to ask each of the panelists in 30 seconds or so to wrap up. What's the major take-home point? Why don't we start with you, David, and work our way towards me, please?
First, I want to thank you all for coming. I hope that you found this an engaging discussion. I know I have, and I appreciate everybody's time that you spent here with us. I think what you need to take away is that this is just a plan, and a plan doesn't always get implemented unless the people that are receiving the plan and the people that are going to benefit from the plan believe in the plan and believe that it's going to get them where they need to go. So I ask you to please make sure that you provide comment if you have thoughts on how the plan moves forward for the state of New Jersey. And remember that, your investment in the plan is also an investment in not just your future, but future generations' futures. And you want to make sure that you make that investment today by at least having your say in how this works. This is going to be in stone for a while once it's published at the end of the year.
Brian.
This is definitely something that is evolving over time. And I can't emphasize how important it is for you to come to the public hearings, to put in the comments, and not just on this, but on all the matters that are pending before the BPU. I think the biggest issue that the industry in New Jersey misses is how important energy policy is to your bottom line. Whatever you do, you're using power, you're using water, and you're paying bills for that. And it's imperative that you make sure that the bills you pay are fair and that you're getting the service that you need at a reasonable price. And that's what we do, and we encourage everybody else to get involved.
Okay.
So thank you all for being here, and thank you to everybody who put this event together. It was I think, a really worthwhile discussion, and it's an exciting time in New Jersey. And I think we're all really excited about energy policy. And I just think it's important that we continue to take a balanced approach, because if we had expanded, there are certain natural gas projects that have been proposed that would have increased access and capacity, which could have saved us billions of dollars, which means that it gives the market room to bear those additional investments in renewables. And so if we want to get to a truly renewable future, and I think we all want to get to a place where we're relying on zero, the net carbon neutral, then we have to incorporate natural gas, because natural gas can continue to lower emissions while giving ratepayers and businesses in the state that headspace, that breathing room to be able to make these investments. I think if you support solar and natural gas, if you support solar and wind, you have to support natural gas, because that's the bridge to get us there. And I would encourage everybody, just as my other panelists did, to make sure you engage in the process. And if you want more information or just to see some, we have a roadtorepair.com is our advocacy organization. We advocate for all types of infrastructure, whether that's water, road, and energy. Roadtorepair.com. We're on Twitter and Facebook, and we do call to actions, really good information, because if the public isn't giving those in government and elected leadership input, this is a really, as we've talked about, a really complex, complicated issue. We need everybody's input.
Great, thank you. So Jeff is going to come back up, and I'd like to thank the panel and NJBIZ, and I'll let Jeff close for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And thanks to Kate Gibbs, Brian Lipman, David Weinstein. As always, we'll have full coverage of this morning's discussion later today on njbiz.com and then in our next print edition, which is July 8th. In the meantime, please feel free to take a look at our current print edition, which there's plenty in there to tide you over until the 8th, which has our Law Power 50 list in it. We'll also upload a video of these proceedings to our YouTube channel. And speaking of the video, thanks to Kane AV for taking care of that. If you want more information about Kane, you can stop by the registration desk. And If you can, please join us at our next discussion, which is on workplace diversity, which is July 30th here at the Doubletree, July 30th, workplace diversity. Thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you again soon.